You know what hurts the most? It's not the cruel words that cut like broken glass, or the dismissive glances that make you feel invisible. It's that devastating moment when you realize that the people you've loved unconditionally and supported through every crisis for years see you as nothing more than an inconvenience, a burden to be tolerated rather than a person to be cherished and respected. My name is Margaret Walsh, and at 72 years old, with silver hair that I still style every morning and hands that have held 3 generations of babies, I thought I'd finally earned some genuine respect in this family. I was devastatingly, heartbreakingly wrong. I've been living with my daughter Sarah and her husband Tom for 3 long years now, ever since my beloved husband Robert passed away from aggressive pancreatic cancer that took him from robust health to a shadow of himself in just 4 brutal months. Those final weeks were a nightmare of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions that left him violently ill, and sleepless nights watching the strongest, most dignified man I'd ever known waste away to nothing. When he died on a cold February morning, holding my hand and whispering that he loved me, I felt like half of my soul had been violently ripped away, leaving a gaping wound that still hasn't healed. Sarah insisted I move in with them immediately after the funeral, said it would be good for everyone, and that I shouldn't be alone in that big house filled with 47 years of memories. At the time, grieving and lost, I thought she genuinely meant it. I sold the house where I'd raised my children, donated most of my furniture to charity, and packed my remaining possessions into boxes that now sit stacked in their garage, like forgotten relics of a life that no longer matters. Tom's retirement dinner was supposed to be a grand celebration. 35 distinguished years at Morrison & Associates Engineering, climbing steadily from junior draftsman fresh out of college to senior project manager overseeing multi-million-dollar construction projects. I'd watched him build his impressive career from the very beginning, supported Sarah through her struggles as a young wife, trying to balance new motherhood with her demanding teaching career. I babysat their children, Emma and Jake, countless nights when they needed date nights or important work events, reading bedtime stories and helping with homework. I cooked elaborate Sunday dinners for years, my famous pot roast with Yorkshire pudding becoming a cherished family tradition that brought us all together around my dining room table. The elegant invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing that spoke of expense and importance. Join us in celebrating Thomas Mitchell's distinguished career and well-deserved retirement from Morrison & Associates. The venue was the prestigious Riverside Country Club, the kind of exclusive establishment where successful people gather in mahogany-paneled rooms to celebrate achievements and network over expensive wine and perfectly prepared meals. I spent weeks carefully choosing my outfit, a navy blue dress with pearl accessories that Robert always said made my gray eyes sparkle like stars on a clear night. I wanted to look dignified and elegant, to represent our family well at such an important milestone occasion. Sarah barely spoke to me during the tense 40-minute drive there, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel of her silver Lexus, classical music playing softly from the premium sound system. She was visibly stressed about every detail, the seating arrangements, the catering, making sure Tom's boss would be impressed with the evening's organization and her family's presentation. When I offered to help with last-minute preparations or coordinate with the venue staff, she waved me off with barely concealed irritation. "Just try not to embarrass us tonight, Mom. Please. This is really important for Tom's reputation and future consulting opportunities." The words cut deep into my heart, but I swallowed my hurt like bitter medicine, reminding myself that this was Tom's special night. But as we walked into that beautifully decorated ballroom, with its magnificent crystal chandeliers casting rainbow prisms across pristine white tablecloths and elaborate centerpieces of white roses, baby's breath, and trailing ivy, I had absolutely no idea that the real humiliation, carefully planned and deliberately cruel, was waiting for me at table 7. The Riverside Country Club buzzed with the sophisticated energy of professional success, old money, and social achievement that permeated every corner of the elegant establishment. Men in expensive charcoal suits tailored to perfection, and Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check, shook hands with the firm, confident grip of those accustomed to closing million-dollar deals and making decisions that affected hundreds of employees. Their wives, adorned in designer jewelry that caught and reflected the light from the magnificent chandeliers suspended above, moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of women who'd spent decades navigating high society events and corporate functions. The air was thick with an intoxicating mixture of aromas, perfectly prepared prime rib and roasted vegetables from the kitchen, the subtle fragrance of expensive French perfumes, and the rich leather scent of well-worn money and established power. Soft jazz played from strategically hidden speakers throughout the room, creating an atmosphere of refined elegance that spoke volumes about achievement, social status, and the kind of success that opens doors to exclusive clubs and private golf courses. I smoothed my navy dress nervously and followed Sarah through the crowd of Tom's colleagues and their families, feeling increasingly invisible and out of place with each careful step across the polished marble floor. The conversations swirling around me centered on topics that felt foreign and intimidating: stock portfolios and investment strategies, vacation homes in the Hamptons and Martha's Vineyard, children attending prestigious Ivy League universities on full scholarships. When Sarah introduced me to various people, I tried to smile warmly and contribute to conversations, but most people's eyes glazed over the moment they heard mother-in-law, as if I'd suddenly transformed into part of the furniture or an unwelcome reminder of aging and mortality. "There's your seat, Mom," Sarah said with forced cheerfulness, pointing toward a round table positioned strategically near the back of the room, far from the head table where immediate family members typically sit during such important celebrations. The distance felt deliberate and symbolic, a physical representation of my diminished status in this family hierarchy. I didn't complain or protest. I'd learned to carefully pick my battles over the past 3 difficult years of living in their home. As I approached my designated chair, weaving carefully between tables filled with animated conversations about golf handicaps, corporate mergers, and weekend retreats to expensive resorts, I noticed something that made my blood run cold and my heart skip several painful beats. Taped to the back of my chair with clear adhesive tape was a handwritten note on hotel stationery, written in bold black ink that stood out starkly against the white paper. "Old lady, don't talk to her." The letters were unmistakably in Tom's distinctive handwriting, the same careful script I'd seen on birthday cards, grocery lists, and thank you notes for decades. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I read it again, hoping desperately that my aging eyes were playing cruel tricks on me, that stress and dim lighting were causing me to misinterpret innocent words. But there it was, clear as daylight and twice as harsh, a warning label treating me like some kind of dangerous object or social pariah to be avoided at all costs by respectable people. I looked around the table with growing horror and disbelief. Tom's colleagues were already comfortably seated, engaged in animated discussions about quarterly earnings reports, weekend golf tournaments, and upcoming business trips to exotic locations. None of them made eye contact with me when I slowly sat down, their conversations flowing seamlessly around me as if I were completely invisible or simply didn't exist. The woman seated to my immediate right, whom I later learned was Tom's boss's wife, actually shifted her chair several noticeable inches away when I settled into my seat, her body language screaming discomfort and disdain. The message had been received loud and clear by everyone at the table, except me, until now. I was the unwelcome guest, the embarrassing relative, the burden that successful people shouldn't have to acknowledge or engage with during their important social gatherings. What would you do in my place? Would you stay silent and accept this public humiliation? Or would you find your voice when it mattered most? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button, because this story is just getting started, and you absolutely won't believe what happens next. The humiliation settled into my bones like arthritis on a cold, rainy November day, a deep, persistent ache that seemed to penetrate every fiber of my being and settle into my very soul. I watched Tom stand confidently at the polished wooden podium, his face absolutely glowing with pride and satisfaction, as his colleagues shared carefully rehearsed stories of his professional achievements, leadership qualities, and personal character. The warm lighting cast a golden glow around him, making him look like the successful, respected man he'd worked so hard to become. Tom always knew how to bring people together, his boss declared with genuine enthusiasm, raising his crystal wine glass high in the air for all to see. He has this remarkable, almost intuitive ability to make everyone feel valued, included, and appreciated. That's the mark of true leadership, The bitter, crushing irony wasn't lost on me for a single moment. Here was a man being publicly celebrated for his people skills, inclusive leadership style, and ability to create welcoming environments, while his own mother-in-law sat labeled like a hazardous material and systematically ignored just 20 feet away from his moment of triumph. I found myself thinking about all the Sunday dinners I'd lovingly prepared when Tom and Sarah were struggling newlyweds, barely making ends meet on his entry-level engineering salary and her substitute teacher's pay. My dining room had been filled with warm laughter, animated conversations, and the comforting aroma of my famous pot roast, creamy mashed potatoes, and green bean casserole made from my mother's secret recipe. I remembered the countless sleepless nights I'd spent walking the floors of their tiny one-bedroom apartment with their colicky baby Emma, bouncing her gently while humming old lullabies so Sarah could get desperately needed rest before facing another demanding day in her elementary school classroom. I thought about the way I'd quietly, without fanfare or expectation of gratitude, slipped Tom a $20 bill when he was between jobs during the devastating recession that hit the construction industry so hard. I never asked for repayment, never mentioned it to Sarah, never made him feel small or dependent. It was just what family did for each other during difficult times. Had all of that love, support, and sacrifice meant absolutely nothing? Had I become so invisible, so irrelevant, that my decades of contribution to this family could be erased with a single cruel note? The woman beside me, Mrs. Henderson, according to her elegant gold name tag, was regaling another guest with detailed, enthusiastic stories of her recent luxury cruise to Alaska with her husband's law firm partners. The glaciers were absolutely magnificent and breathtaking, she gushed, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured dramatically with manicured hands. Though I do worry about all those elderly passengers on these cruises. They move so slowly through the buffet lines, always holding up the excursion groups with their walkers and wheelchairs, complaining about everything from the temperature to the food to the entertainment. She glanced at me briefly with barely concealed disdain and obvious discomfort, then looked away quickly as if my advanced age might be somehow contagious or socially embarrassing. I excused myself to the ladies' room, desperately needing a moment to collect my scattered thoughts, wounded pride, and shattered dignity. The country club's restroom was as elegant and expensive as everything else in this establishment. Marble countertops imported from Italy, gold fixtures that gleamed under soft, flattering lighting, and fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases. In the ornate mirror with its elaborate gilded frame, I saw a woman who'd lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis, raised 3 children essentially as a single mother when my first husband abandoned us for his secretary, worked 2 demanding jobs to put Sarah through college while pursuing my own teaching degree at night school. I'd survived the heartbreaking deaths of my parents, buried close friends who'd been like sisters to me, started over completely at 50 when my carefully planned life fell apart like a house of cards in a windstorm. When exactly had I become just an old lady to be avoided, dismissed, and treated like an embarrassing burden rather than a woman with 7 decades of experience, wisdom, and stories worth telling? Walking back through the country club's mahogany-paneled hallways, past oil portraits of distinguished members and display cases filled with golf trophies and sailing awards, I made a decision that would change everything about this evening and possibly my entire future relationship with this family. I'd spent 3 long, difficult years trying to be the perfect, unobtrusive houseguest, tiptoeing around Tom's moods and Sarah's stress, making myself as small and invisible as possible to avoid conflict. But tonight, as I returned to that table with its cruel label still taped to my chair like a scarlet letter, I realized something profoundly important. Respect isn't automatically given based on age, family relationships, or past contributions. It's earned through action, courage, and the willingness to stand up for your own dignity when no one else will. The main course had been efficiently cleared away by the country club's professional waitstaff in their crisp white uniforms and black bow ties, and the evening was gracefully winding down to its traditional final act, the heartfelt toasts and commemorative speeches that mark the end of such formal celebrations in American corporate culture. Tom's boss had delivered a polished, well-rehearsed speech about dedication, leadership, and the importance of mentoring younger employees. His longtime golf buddy had shared an embarrassingly funny story from their college fraternity days that had everyone laughing and shaking their heads at youthful indiscretions. Sarah had given a sweet, heartfelt speech about being proud of her husband's unwavering dedication to both his demanding career and their family, her voice trembling slightly with genuine emotion. The microphone now sat silently on its chrome stand, seemingly finished with its duties for the evening, while conversations gradually resumed at tables throughout the elegant ballroom. The soft clink of coffee cups against fine china saucers and dessert spoons against crystal glasses created a gentle background symphony of social interaction and satisfied contentment. I watched the room with the careful, analytical attention of someone who'd spent decades reading people, a skill honed through years of managing classrooms full of energetic children with different personalities, backgrounds, and needs, and navigating the complex dynamics of family relationships, school politics, and community involvement. Tom's colleagues, successful men and women who'd built impressive careers on solid foundations of respect, professionalism, ethical behavior, and collaborative leadership, had participated in this casual cruelty without question, apparent conscience, or even basic human decency. The country club staff, extensively trained in hospitality, customer service, and creating welcoming environments for all guests, had served me dinner with professional courtesy while pretending not to see the degrading note taped to my chair. Even the other guests at my table, educated people with advanced degrees, responsible positions in their communities, and presumably strong moral compasses, had treated me like an unwelcome intruder rather than a fellow human being deserving of basic courtesy and respect. The profound irony struck me like a physical blow to my chest. Here we were in a room full of people celebrating achievement, success, professional accomplishment, and the values that supposedly define good character, yet they'd collectively failed the most fundamental test of human decency. They'd reduced a woman with 7 decades of life experience, professional achievements as an educator, and countless contributions to family and community to nothing more than a warning label, a social hazard to be avoided like a contagious disease. I thought about my late husband, Robert, who used to say during our most difficult times, "Maggie, sometimes you have to speak up and stand your ground, even when your voice shakes and your knees knock together like castanets. That's when courage matters most, when it's hardest to find." My voice hadn't shaken in years. I'd learned to keep it steady through decades of practice, through raising children who tested every boundary and challenged every rule, through burying parents and friends, through starting over at 50 when my carefully planned life fell apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. The DJ was methodically packing up his sophisticated sound equipment, coiling cables with practiced efficiency and loading speakers onto a wheeled cart. People were beginning to gather their purses, jackets, and leftover centerpieces, making polite small talk about traffic conditions, babysitter schedules, and upcoming weekend plans. In 10 minutes, this evening would be officially over, and I'd return to being the invisible old woman relegated to the corner bedroom, expected to be grateful for the privilege of existing quietly in the margins of my own family's life, never complaining or asking for anything more than basic tolerance, unless I did something dramatic and decisive about it right now, in this moment, with all these witnesses present to see and hear what happened next. I stood up slowly and deliberately, my chair scraping against the polished hardwood floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the gradually quieting room. Every movement was purposeful and calculated, projecting the dignity and inner strength that had carried me through 7 decades of life's challenges, disappointments, and unexpected victories. Sometimes the most powerful and transformative moments begin with the quietest, most personal decisions made in the face of injustice. What would you do if you had one chance to change everything, to reclaim your dignity and demand the respect you deserve? Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because you absolutely won't want to miss what happens when this grandmother finally speaks her truth. The microphone felt surprisingly heavy and substantial in my hands, its metal surface cool against my palms, but my grip remained rock steady despite the enormous magnitude of what I was about to do and the potential consequences for my family relationships. The room hadn't quite noticed the significant shift in energy yet. Animated conversations were still happening at various tables throughout the spacious ballroom, the soft clink of coffee cups against delicate saucers and dessert spoons against fine china, creating a gentle background symphony of social interaction, satisfaction, and post-dinner contentment. I cleared my throat deliberately and purposefully, and the sound carried clearly through the sophisticated speaker system that had been professionally installed throughout the venue, causing heads to turn with curiosity, mild concern, and growing attention. The conversations began to fade as people realized something unexpected was happening, something that wasn't part of the evening's carefully planned program. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying the natural authority and confidence of someone who'd once managed a classroom of 30 energetic third graders while maintaining perfect order, respect, and educational focus. "I'd like to say a few words about Tom, if you don't mind giving me just a moment of your time." The tone was polite, but absolutely firm, the kind of voice that had been developed through decades of teaching, parenting, and community leadership, a voice that brooked no argument or interruption. The room fell silent in that peculiar, almost magical way that happens when something completely unexpected occurs at a formal gathering where every detail has been planned and rehearsed. It was the kind of profound silence that seems to have actual weight and substance, pressing against your eardrums and making every small sound. The mechanical hum of the air conditioning system, someone's nervous cough from the back of the room, the distant clatter of dishes being cleared and cleaned in the kitchen seem amplified and strangely significant. Tom's face went from mild confusion to barely concealed panic in the span of a single heartbeat, his complexion paling as he realized that his carefully controlled evening was about to take an unexpected turn. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor, her hands gripping her linen napkin so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, her eyes darting frantically between me and the nearest exit as if calculating possible escape routes. "My name is Margaret Walsh, and I'm Tom's mother-in-law," I announced clearly and proudly, letting that crucial information sink in and settle over the assembled crowd like morning mist over a quiet lake. Several people at my table shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their body language betraying their growing anxiety. They were probably wondering with increasing dread if I'd seen the note, if I knew about their collective participation in this evening's carefully orchestrated cruelty and social exclusion. I've had the privilege and honor of watching Tom build his impressive career for the past 25 years, and I have some stories I'd like to share with all of you tonight, I continued, my voice growing stronger and more confident with each carefully chosen word. Stories that I think will give you a different perspective on the man we're celebrating this evening. The silence deepened and expanded throughout the room, becoming almost tangible and electric with anticipation. I could hear the subtle mechanical hum of the climate control system, someone's barely audible nervous cough from somewhere near the back of the elegant ballroom, the distant sound of kitchen staff efficiently cleaning up after the meal service. Tom's boss leaned forward slightly in his chair, probably wondering with growing concern and professional anxiety what this unexpected speaker might say that could potentially embarrass his recently retired employee, reflect poorly on the company's reputation, or create an uncomfortable situation that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. "You see," I continued, my voice now filled with the quiet strength that comes from a lifetime of experience, "I've learned something profoundly important during my 72 years on this earth. Through decades of teaching children, raising a family, and carefully observing human nature in all its beautiful complexity and occasional ugliness. True success isn't just about what you accomplish in your professional career, impressive and admirable though those achievements might be." I paused for effect, letting my words resonate through the room before delivering the crucial message that would define everything that followed. Real success, lasting success, is measured by how you treat the people who can't do anything for you in return, who have no power to advance your career or enhance your social status, who can't offer you anything except their love, loyalty, and respect. The room held its collective breath, every person present waiting with growing tension to see if this would be a blessing or a reckoning, a celebration or an exposure of uncomfortable truths that would change how they saw the man they'd just been honoring. I saw Tom swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly as beads of perspiration began forming on his forehead despite the perfectly controlled temperature of the air-conditioned ballroom. Sarah's knuckles were white where she gripped her linen napkin, her breathing shallow and rapid as she watched her carefully constructed social world potentially crumble before her eyes. But I also noticed something else happening throughout the elegant room. People were listening with genuine, focused attention, the kind of respectful, engaged listening you can't fake or force, the kind that comes when someone speaks with authentic moral authority and hard-earned wisdom. Tonight, I want to tell you about the Tom that most of you have never seen, I said, and despite everything that had happened, my smile was completely genuine and warm. Because sometimes the most important and lasting lessons about character, integrity, and what it means to be truly successful come from the most unexpected teachers, in the most surprising circumstances, when we least expect to learn something profound about ourselves and others. The anticipation in the room was palpable, electric with tension and curiosity. I could feel every eye focused on me, every ear straining to catch my next words. This was my moment. The moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for my entire life, drawing on 7 decades of experience, disappointment, resilience, and hard-won wisdom. 25 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sophisticated sound system. Tom was a young man fresh out of college, full of dreams and ambition, but struggling to make ends meet on an entry-level salary. He and my daughter Sarah were newlyweds, living in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment with hand-me-down furniture and more love than money. I watched this young man work 16-hour days, taking on extra projects and weekend assignments, not because he was greedy or ambitious in a selfish way, but because he wanted to provide for my daughter and give her the life she deserved. I paused, letting that image settle in their minds, the hard-working young man they all knew, but perhaps hadn't fully appreciated. I watched him come home exhausted, his clothes dirty from construction sites, his hands calloused from honest work, and still find energy to help Sarah grade papers for her elementary school students. I watched him give up his Saturday golf games with friends to paint our kitchen when I couldn't afford to hire professionals. I watched him spend his lunch breaks researching the best deals on baby furniture when Sarah was pregnant with Emma, making spreadsheets to stretch every dollar. The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word. I could see Tom's expression changing, confusion and fear giving way to something else, perhaps the beginning of understanding, or maybe just surprise that I was telling positive stories instead of exposing his cruelty. But here's what really impressed me about Tom's character, I continued, my voice growing stronger with conviction. It wasn't just his work ethic or his dedication to providing for his family. It was the way he treated people who couldn't help his career advancement. I watched him spend an entire weekend helping his elderly neighbor, Mr. Peterson, clean out his garage after Mrs. Peterson passed away. Tom didn't know this man well, had nothing to gain from the gesture, but he saw someone in pain and offered his time and strength freely. I could see people in the audience beginning to nod, recognizing the Tom they thought they knew. But I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. I watched him drive 40 minutes out of his way every Sunday for 2 years to visit his grandmother in the nursing home. Even when she no longer remembered his name due to Alzheimer's, he would sit with her, hold her hand, and tell her stories about his week, knowing she wouldn't remember his visit an hour after he left. That's the kind of man I thought I knew. The silence in the room had taken on a different quality now. Not just attention, but genuine emotional engagement. I could see tears in some eyes, nods of recognition and respect. This was working exactly as I'd hoped. So imagine my surprise, I said, my voice taking on a different tone, still controlled, but with an edge that cut through the warm atmosphere like a blade. When I discovered tonight that this same man, this person I've loved and supported for 25 years, had labeled my chair with a note warning people not to talk to the old lady. The gasp that went through the room was audible, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the space. Heads turned toward my table, toward the chair I'd been sitting in, toward Tom, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. What would you do if you discovered that someone you'd loved and supported had publicly humiliated you in front of their colleagues and friends? Subscribe and hit that like button, because this confrontation is about to reach its explosive climax. The aftermath of my revelation rippled through the ballroom like shockwaves from an earthquake, transforming the elegant atmosphere of celebration into something charged with tension, discomfort, and barely suppressed emotion. I could see people craning their necks to get a better look at my table, trying to spot the infamous note that had sparked this unexpected confrontation. Whispered conversations began breaking out at tables throughout the room, guests leaning toward each other with expressions of shock, curiosity, and growing moral outrage. Tom's boss, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and expensive glasses, looked absolutely mortified. His face had gone pale as he undoubtedly calculated the potential damage to his company's reputation and his own professional standing. Here was a retirement celebration for one of his senior managers, and it was turning into a public exposure of character flaws that reflected poorly on everyone associated with the honoree. Sarah had covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with what I couldn't tell was embarrassment, anger, or perhaps the beginning of genuine remorse. The other guests at my table were studying their dessert plates with intense fascination, as if the pattern on the china might provide escape from this increasingly uncomfortable situation. "You see," I continued, my voice steady and clear despite the emotional weight of what I was sharing, "I've spent the last 3 years living in Tom and Sarah's home, trying my best to be helpful without being intrusive, grateful without being demanding. I've cooked meals, helped with household chores, babysat my grandchildren, and tried to contribute positively to their family life. I thought I was welcome. I thought I was valued. I thought I was loved." The pain in my voice was real and unmistakable, and I could see it affecting people throughout the room. Several women were dabbing at their eyes with napkins, and more than a few men were shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, perhaps thinking about their own aging parents or in-laws. But tonight, I learned the truth about how I'm really perceived in this family. Not as a person with 7 decades of life experience, not as someone who raised the woman Tom married, not as a grandmother who loves her grandchildren unconditionally. No, I'm just an old lady who shouldn't be spoken to, an embarrassment to be hidden away and ignored. I turned to look directly at Tom, who seemed to have shrunk in his chair. "Tom, I want you to know that I forgive you for this cruelty. I forgive you because I remember the young man who helped his neighbor and visited his grandmother. I forgive you because I know that success and social pressure can sometimes make us forget who we really are and what really matters." The room was so quiet, you could have heard a pin drop. Even the kitchen staff seemed to have stopped their cleaning to listen to this unexpected drama unfolding in their elegant venue. "But I also want you to know," I continued, my voice taking on a tone of quiet authority that commanded absolute attention, "that forgiveness doesn't mean acceptance of unacceptable behavior. It doesn't mean I'll continue to make myself small and invisible to accommodate your embarrassment about my age or your discomfort with having an elderly person in your social circle." I could see Tom's colleagues exchanging glances, some looking ashamed, others appearing to reassess their own behavior toward older family members and colleagues. The woman who had been complaining about elderly cruise passengers earlier was staring at her hands, her face flushed with what I hoped was recognition of her own prejudices. "I've decided," I announced, my voice growing stronger with each word, "that I will no longer live in a home where I'm treated as a burden rather than a blessing. I will no longer accept being relegated to the margins of my own family's life. I deserve better, and frankly, so do all the other older adults who are dismissed, ignored, and devalued by a society that seems to have forgotten that wisdom comes with experience, and that every elderly person was once young, vital, and full of dreams, just like all of you." The silence that followed was profound and meaningful, filled with the weight of truth spoken courageously in the face of social pressure and family dynamics that had gone unchallenged for too long. The moment stretched between us like a taut wire, charged with electricity and the potential for either healing or permanent fracture. Tom slowly rose from his chair, his movements careful and deliberate, as if he were navigating through a minefield of his own making. His face was a complex map of emotions: shame, regret, fear, and something that might have been the beginning of genuine understanding. "Margaret," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly through the silent ballroom thanks to the room's excellent acoustics. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to explain or excuse what I did tonight." The vulnerability in his voice was unmistakable, and I could see that this public confrontation had stripped away all his professional confidence and social polish, leaving him exposed as simply a man who had made a terrible mistake and was beginning to understand its full impact. "You don't need to explain it, Tom," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "I think we all understand what happened here. Success and social pressure can make us forget our values, make us prioritize appearances over character, make us treat the people who love us as inconveniences rather than blessings." I could see tears beginning to form in his eyes, and despite everything, my heart ached for him. This was the young man I'd watched grow into adulthood, the father of my grandchildren, the husband my daughter loved. He wasn't evil, he was human, flawed, and caught up in a culture that often values youth and success over wisdom and experience. "But here's what I need you to understand," I continued, my voice taking on the tone of a teacher delivering a crucial lesson. "Every person in this room will someday be old, if they're fortunate enough to live that long. Every one of you will someday face the choice between being treated with dignity and respect, or being dismissed and marginalized because of your age." I gestured toward the assembled crowd, making eye contact with as many people as possible. "The way we treat our elders says everything about who we are as individuals and as a society. When we label them as burdens, when we exclude them from conversations, when we act as if their years of experience and wisdom have no value, we're not just hurting them, we're diminishing ourselves." Tom took a step toward me, his hands trembling slightly. "Margaret, please, I know I don't deserve it, but is there any way you could forgive me? Is there any way I could make this right?" The question hung in the air, and I could feel the entire room holding its breath, waiting for my response. This was the moment of truth, the climax of this unexpected drama that had transformed a retirement celebration into a lesson about human dignity and family relationships. "Tom," I said, my voice soft but clear, "forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you receive as a gift, and I give it to you freely, not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger and resentment would only hurt me more than it would hurt you." I could see relief flooding his face, but I held up my hand to indicate I wasn't finished. "However," I continued, "forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. It means we have the opportunity to build something better, something based on genuine respect and appreciation rather than tolerance and obligation." The tears were flowing freely down Tom's face now, and I could see Sarah approaching us, her own eyes red with crying. The room watched in fascination as this family drama played out before them, a real-life lesson in redemption, forgiveness, and the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds. "I want to earn your respect back," Tom said, his voice stronger now, filled with determination. "I want to be the man you thought I was, the man I used to be before I lost sight of what really matters." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and I felt something shift in my heart. Not a complete healing, but the beginning of hope that perhaps this painful evening might lead to something better for all of us. What would you do if someone who had hurt you deeply asked for a second chance? Would you be willing to risk being hurt again for the possibility of genuine reconciliation? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button, because this story's conclusion will leave you thinking about the power of forgiveness and the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. 6 months have passed since that unforgettable evening at the Riverside Country Club, and I'm writing this from my new apartment, a bright, cheerful 2-bedroom place just 10 minutes from Sarah and Tom's house, close enough to be involved in my grandchildren's lives, but far enough to maintain my independence and dignity. The morning sun streams through my kitchen window as I sip coffee from my favorite mug, the one Emma painted for me in art class with "World's Best Grandma" written in crooked purple letters. The changes in our family have been remarkable and profound. Tom kept his promise about earning back my respect, and he's done it through actions rather than words. He calls me every Sunday morning, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wants to hear about my week and share what's happening in his life. He started a volunteer program at his former company, pairing retired engineers with recent graduates, creating mentorship relationships that benefit both generations. When I mentioned feeling isolated in my new apartment, he organized a weekly dinner rotation where I cook for the family one night, Sarah cooks another, and we order takeout for the third, creating a rhythm of connection that feels natural rather than forced. Sarah and I have had long, honest conversations about the years of resentment and misunderstanding that built up between us. She admitted that having me in their home had felt overwhelming at times, not because of anything I did wrong, but because she was struggling with her own fears about aging and mortality. Seeing me as a daily reminder of her future had created anxiety that she'd channeled into irritation and distance. Understanding her perspective didn't excuse the treatment I received, but it helped us build a bridge toward genuine reconciliation and mutual respect. The story of that evening has spread far beyond our family circle. Tom's former colleagues have reached out to share their own experiences with aging parents and in-laws, many admitting that my speech made them reconsider their own attitudes and behaviors. Mrs. Henderson, the woman who complained about elderly cruise passengers, sent me a handwritten letter apologizing for her comments and sharing that she'd started volunteering at a senior center, discovering that the older adults there had fascinating stories and valuable wisdom to share. I've been invited to speak at several community events about ageism and family relationships, sharing my experience as a way to encourage others to examine their own biases and assumptions. It's given me a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt since retiring from teaching, a way to turn a painful experience into something positive and educational. My grandchildren, Emma and Jake, now spend every Saturday morning with me, helping me tend to the small garden I've planted on my apartment balcony, and listening to stories about their grandfather Robert and the adventures we had together. They've started asking thoughtful questions about aging, death, and what it means to treat people with respect, regardless of their age or circumstances. These conversations have become some of the most meaningful moments of my week. The most surprising development has been my renewed sense of confidence and self-worth. Standing up for myself that night, speaking my truth in front of all those people, reminded me that I have value and dignity that don't diminish with age. I've started taking art classes, joined a book club, and even begun dating a lovely widower named Frank, whom I met at the community center. At 72, I'm discovering that life can still hold surprises, new friendships, and unexpected joys. Tom recently told me that the evening at the country club was a turning point for him, not just in our relationship, but in his understanding of what success really means. He said that watching me stand up for myself with such grace and strength made him realize that true leadership isn't about commanding respect through position or power. It's about earning respect through character and treating every person with dignity. As I finish writing this story, I'm filled with gratitude for the painful lesson that led to profound growth for our entire family. Sometimes the most difficult moments in our lives become the catalysts for the most important changes. Sometimes we have to risk everything, relationships, comfort, security, to reclaim our dignity and demand the respect we deserve. To anyone reading this who feels invisible, dismissed, or devalued because of their age, you have worth that transcends the number of years you've lived. Your experience is valuable, your wisdom is needed, and your voice deserves to be heard. Don't let anyone make you feel like you should apologize for taking up space in this world. Stand tall, speak your truth, and remember that respect is not something you beg for. It's something you command through your actions and your refusal to accept anything less than you deserve. The evening that began with cruelty and humiliation ended with forgiveness and transformation. It reminded all of us that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become better versions of ourselves, and to build relationships based on genuine love and respect rather than obligation and tolerance. The end.